I want to thank you all for having me here um, today. Again, my name is Marion Gray-Hopkins, and I am the president of a coalition of concerned mothers. This is a recently organization that we recently pulled together of mothers in Maryland, D.C., and Virginia because we're tired. We're sick and tired of our children being murdered. And so we have formed this coalition to not only address police brutality, but we're looking at the mass incarceration. We're looking at senseless gun violence because we know when you connect the dots, they all interconnect. So we're looking at working with this organization along with other organizations, with law enforcement, other mothers organizations across the country, because again, we all have one common goal here. We may be located here locally, but this is a national issue. So the organizations nationally across this country need to come together collectively to come up with solutions to this problem that plagues our country. And my son, Gary Hopkins Jr., who was a second-year college student, was 19 years old and murdered on November the 27th, 1999, unarmed. As you hear across this country, most of these folks of color are unarmed when they are murdered. I won't go into a long dissertation about Gary's story, but know that Gary was wrongfully murdered. We talk about indictments. I got an indictment in Gary's case. It's not the indictments that are important these days, it's the convictions. So we fail to get convictions. That's what our fight needs to be towards, not only getting, the indictments, but convictions of these officers. And so I stand here today in solidarity, united with Tamir Rice's family. I was appalled. I am in disbelief. I am in disgust. I am in outrage that from what we saw on that tape, 2 seconds after the police officers got there, they just fired down and assassinated a 12-year-old child. We continue to see this across this country. Had there been something done when my son was murdered back in 1999 and years before that, had we done something, the murders that we have seen across this country would not have happened if there was accountability, if there was transparency. We need to have this. So to Samira Rice and her family, I stand with you, united in getting justice and bringing about change for this issue that we are plagued with today, where we have law enforcement who are now becoming the judge, the jury, and the executioner. This has to stop. We're sick and tired of being sick and tired. We're saying today, enough is enough. There are many things that we need across this country in order to bring about change, not just locally, but we need to start locally. We need to tackle this issue on several and many different fronts. We're fighting in the state of Maryland because law enforcement officers get 10 days before they can even be questioned. 10 days. They are given information of witnesses' statements. They are given information from other law enforcement officers' statements. That, to me, in my opinion, and I'm sure is the opinion of many of you here today, they have an opportunity to collaborate on a story that is not truth. You read in the papers today the stories, you have to get the stories from the families because what you read is not always the truth. There were stories told about my son that was not truth. In addition to the 10 days they have, we need independent prosecutors. We have seen just recently in the Tamir Rice case, they failed to indict. Even when we saw that with our own eyes, what's happened. We saw in Chicago. We see it with our own eyes. Nothing happens. There are cases that are across this country. Maria Hamilton, whose son, Dontre Hamilton, in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, mentally ill in a park where he had the right to be, was gunned down, shot 17 times. No indictment. We get to the Department of Justice, where the standards are so high, we will never, rarely ever, have anyone's civil rights or human rights violated because it has to be the officer set out willful intent to murder. How easily is that going to be to bring about a conviction or indictment with someone for willful intent. But there is a systemic issue across this country with our police departments. There is not a bad apple in the police department. There's a bad crop across this country of police officers. And until we, the people, come together and say that we are demanding change, like eliminate the 10 days, why should you as an officer be held to a different standard than us? You should be held at a higher standard than us. Why should we not get an independent prosecutor when we know there is camaraderie amongst the officers, there's camaraderie amongst them and the entire judicial system? How can those that are impacted, families and victims, get a fair and impartial trial or treatment when we know about the blue wall of silence and the code of silence amongst them? We need and we are demanding independent prosecutors in these cases where there is police brutality. We're also asking for independent boards, civilian review boards with subpoena power. We need that because we know if the Internal Affairs Division is investigating their own, how likely are they to bring charges against their own? Again, with that blue wall of silence, that is nearly impossible for us to get that type of indictment or that type of, for lack of a better term, for them to do anything against those particular officers. So again, we need the independent review board, civilian review boards. We also need, we know that victims, at least in the state of Maryland, I don't know across the country, but I'm sure there's some similarity. In the state of Maryland, if you are brutalized by a police officer, you only have 90 days. You could have been arrested, you could have been locked up, and on that 90th day, you are released. You are no longer able to file a complaint against the officer. Yet if you attack an officer or what they will call an attack, they have unlimited amount of time to bring charges against us. Is that fair? No. We need that changed. There are so many different pieces of this puzzle that we as the people need to ensure that we get with our elected officials to say we demand changes.